Hello, I'm Sleepy Sunrise, you can call me San, and welcome to my channel. I like to call myself an artist, and with this channel I plan to share my projects and my experiences learning new skills. One of those new skills being making VTuber models. So in the past, I've previously made 2 models just for fun, however, they weren't that great, so this video will be about the 3rd model I have ever made, and that is the one I am using right now. In this video, I'm going to go through all the mistakes I made and issues I had while making this model as a beginner. So be prepared to see a lot of me struggling. Like, a lot. And there may even be mistakes that I haven't noticed even after rewatching the 70 hours of rigging footage. 70 hours. I don't even know why I recorded so much, but I'm just going to cover what I know went wrong and let's get into it. So first, let's quickly talk about drawing the model. That's right, I didn't even make it to rigging to make my first mistake, and drawing is meant to be the easy part for me. So obviously I drew and designed this model to represent my online persona. I love her, but there are definitely things I could have done better. So while shading the hair, there's a part on the long back that I did not draw my shadows all the way up the hair. I don't even remember how this happened, but it obviously cuts off where it intersects with the hair in front, and it's only on this piece on either side of my hair. So this doesn't really show in the final rig because I made sure to try and hide it as best as I could. It mainly only shows on this side when I'm moving and when I have this toggle on. See, as I change the toggle, it doesn't show up as much. I think I can fix this just by redoing the art piece and just re-uploading it to my art meshes in Live 2D. I just haven't done it yet. This next thing isn't necessarily a mistake, but something to keep in mind. The brush I use for my line art is not opaque, so when rigging I had some issues with the line art being slightly transparent. For the most part, I didn't really mind because I like the line art brush that I use and how it looks, but it was mainly an issue when I was rigging the mouth, just because I think the mouth needs to be more opaque for its lines, and I had problems. So it's just something to keep in mind for the future, and maybe I will just try and make my line art thicker or duplicate it until it's opaque. Like, this is me rigging my mouth line art, and yeah, as you can see, just the edges being slightly transparent wasn't the best of times for me because it just meant I had to make sure that my lip layers were like right on the edge of my lines. Speaking of mistakes that weren't necessarily mistakes, but just mistakes for my mental health, glasses. I gave my model glasses. I've never rigged glasses before. I didn't know how to. I didn't know what was happening, and it was such a pain to rig these because I didn't want them just floating on my face. I wanted them to have the side stems so that they were like my glasses. Yeah. Self-inserting being blind onto my model was a mistake. So now we get to my actual mistakes during the rigging process, and can I first just say, how did I go so long using light mode? For most of the rigging of this model, I didn't know that dark mode existed, so I apologize. Pretty much all of these clips will be Live 2D in light mode because I didn't know dark mode existed until halfway through. So this first one is probably the biggest mistake you could make while rigging a model, and that is not creating or applying an art mesh to your art pieces. So while I was rigging the eyes, I didn't create art meshes for the inner parts of the eye. At this point, I think I was doing art meshes as I went, and I forgot that I hadn't done any of the inner eye ones, so I proceeded to rig the entire inside of the eye, and even reflected the eye without realizing I did not have art meshes on the inside. The craziest thing is that I remember while rigging them, I was like, why are my deformers barely moving anything? How did I not realize? Look how much I deformed the deformer. I'm not sure when I realized, because for some reason I didn't record it, but I eventually applied art meshes and re-rigged it all. I cannot stress enough how important art meshes are. After this, I think I went and made art meshes for literally every single layer of my work before I continued rigging. So I'm going to attempt to explain art meshes. How I understand an art mesh is that when you import a file into Live 2D, it automatically applies an art mesh, but with the minimum number of vertices possible. It's like a box, as you can see here. The less vertices on the art mesh, the less detailed edits you can do. So it imports with 4 points on the art mesh, and as you can see here, my deformer barely moves the piece except for the 4 outer points, as that is where the art mesh points are. Now, if I compare that to one with an art mesh with lots of vertices, there's a clear difference in how easy it is to edit the shape. After looking back at my rig, I thought that my hair physics weren't exaggerated enough and were quite stagnant once I stopped moving. This is a purely preferential thing. I just wanted the ends of my hair to sway for a little bit longer after I stopped moving, because that just felt nice to me, and particularly when I tilted my head on the Z angle, I wanted there to be a bit more swaying to happen. So to fix this, I've re-edited my hair physics for the X and Y settings. I made some changes to the duration and shaking influences, mainly to the ends of my pendulums, as they represent the ends of my hair, apart from on the X physics setting where X3 represents the ends of my fringe pieces, so I made sure to make that sway a little bit more. I tested these new settings by dragging my head movements back and forth because I did not want the input to be too much, as it would bug the pendulum and not have it swing smoothly, which makes everything just jump up and down. I kept adjusting till I was happy, and these are the settings that I ended up with. I also did this for my earring physics as well, and I went to the physics setting in my VTube studio and adjusted them there as well, because I had them a little bit too low before. So here is a direct comparison of the before and after physics for the hair. The main difference is just like how much the ends sway and for how long, and that they are affected more by the Z angle. Next, I will be talking about the mistakes I made with the mouth. There were 2 problems I had. The first was that I felt like the mouth shapes that I rigged weren't varied or exaggerated enough. I remember my CGI professor mentioning that we should exaggerate the shapes for mouths when we were making blend shapes for our 3D models, and that was because most of the time you don't actually reach the upper or lower limits of a rig, so you should exaggerate a bit more than you'd expect. I believe that this can be applied to 2D models as well, and by rigging more exaggerated expressions, your model will overall have more diversity in the way that the mouth can move as well. So the frames I re-rigged were mainly the largest smile, some mouth open frames, and the frowns, because I realized my model actually did not really have a frowning mouth. Here is a side-by-side comparison of my original mouth rig and my redone mouth rig. Now, in these videos, you may still notice that my model doesn't really frown, even though I just re-rigged them, especially when the mouth is open. So for this problem, I actually had to go exploring my VTube studio settings, and I took a look at my mouth smile parameters, and apparently the moment that I open my mouth, VTube studio just registers that as a smile even if I'm not smiling at all. And while VTube Studio may think that my resting face is a smile, I can assure you it's not. I've had way too many people all throughout my life thinking that I hate them just because they thought I was glaring at them because I wasn't smiling. And it's just what my face looks like. So changing the limits on VTube Studio didn't change that much for me, but I use VBridger to track my face, so I was actually able to adjust what it outputs to VTube Studio. So for the smile parameter, I went to the curve output and adjusted it until it felt right. This is my final curve here and my final VTube Studio settings. By adjusting the curve in VBridger, it makes VBridger send a lower number than what it is reading as the output, and then that allows my model to do something other than frown. So now I have a lot more variety that I can utilize with the expressions on my model, such as I love that I am not constantly having to smile anymore, even when I'm not. So next is about some toggles and not having things change properly. So first, I incorrectly rigged some frames for the tear animation. When I set up the expression and animation in VTube Studio, the tears would fade in and out when trying to turn off the animation, as you can see here. And this was because I rigged to 2 different parameter types for this one. One was to turn the visuals on and off, and the other one was for the crying loop. I did not use deformers for this and just rigged the art mesh directly. And I made a mistake because I did not make sure that when the sad parameter was to the off key, that the tears would be at 0 opacity for all the keys on the crying loop. There was one key where they were not at 0 opacity, and this is where all the problems start. And in VTube Studio, the tears are set to change the idle animation, and that means that the animation will continue to play even after the sad expression is off, so it would continue to go around this keyed animation loop, and the tears would flash in when they reached that key in the animation. But this was actually an easy fix because all I had to do was go back into Live 2D and change the opacity on all keys of the animation when it was off. Next up, when testing the toggles, I realized that when I changed to my short hair, some of the long hair would be half visible when I tilted my head. This was also because of my rigging something on multiple parameters. To fix this, I went into Live 2D, selected all of the hair meshes in my long hair, and then found which parameter I rigged the parts to, and then just changed the opacity for those keys. And this is why it is so important to test your model so you know if something is not working or if something is going wrong, because you don't want to just start using it and everything just be an issue. Now we have reached the final issue / problem that I had with this model, and it was arguably the most frustrating. This took me a while just to figure out what was wrong, and it has to do with animations. So I made a couple animations for this model, but only one of them caused me real issues, and that was my sleeping animation. So I made this animation to be an idle animation for when my model lost tracking so it wouldn't just freeze. And this is how the animation was looking in Live 2D. But when I used it in VTube Studio, it would look like this. So the differences here are that the head and ears did not keep their keyframe animations, and after many a Google, I found out that if you have parameters which are set as outputs for any physics setting, whatever animation you apply to them will be overwritten by the physics setting when you bake the physics. So basically, if you have a parameter that is an output for a physics setting, it cannot be used in an animation. Both my ear Y movements and all of my face angles I had set as physics outputs. For the ears, I had an easier time fixing this. I just duplicated the parameters and copied over all the forms so I could use one set for the physics and one set for the animation. The face angles were a different story. While I originally planned to do the same thing, it would take way too long as I had so many art meshes that were tied to these parameters. I'm going to try and explain this as best as I can, so stick with me. When I rigged my face angles, rather than rigging them on the angle X, Y, and Z parameters, I created new parameters that would be physics outputs of those angle X, Y, Z parameters. I did this following Chupoko's tutorial, and they rigged it this way so that the head bounces back a little when you turn, which I think is super cute and it adds a little something something to a rig. However, this method means that you have to rig the head movement onto a physics parameter. There's nothing wrong with this method, I honestly love it. It just means that you can't use those head angles when making animations. So if you plan to use the face angle parameters in an animation like I did, this rigging style won't work, and I found that out the hard way. So how did I fix this? Instead of duplicating all of my parameters like I did with the ears, I just decided to change all of my physics settings. Simple, right? Firstly, I removed these parameters from being physics outputs, but this isn't enough. If I stopped there, the head would no longer move, since in VTube Studio, I had my output parameters set to the angle X, Y, and Z parameters. This also meant that the inputs for all of my other physics settings were those angle X, Y, Z parameters. Therefore, I had to go through all of my physics settings and change the inputs to my rigged head parameters, as well as changing my output parameters on VTube Studio. In the future, I will probably just rig on the X, Y, Z angles if I plan to do animations. So those were all the mistakes I made while making this model, at least the ones that I know about. They really ranged over the entire process, even things I thought I wouldn't have any issues with, like the drawing. Maybe through my mistakes you've learned something as well. Probably not. If you've had similar experiences rigging, or if you have any advice on a better way to do things, please let me know. I want to improve and struggle less, because making models is actually so enjoyable. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about this model, because there's so much that I didn't show in this video, I will probably release a model showcase soon, so look out for that. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to get some sleep.